Greetings, dear viewers, and welcome to my fan commentary on the two-part pilot episodes of Power Rangers Time Force, Force from the Future. And today is at the time I'm recording this fan commentary, today's the day the show did premiere 20 years ago on February 3rd, 2001, because it was a long time ago since the series did premiere around this date. And what a heck of a way to open up Time Force compared to, Quasar Quest and Operation Lightspeed. Thinking back to Time Force's first two episodes, it takes everything that Quasar Quest and Operation Lightspeed could have been in their respective openers of a season, but made it a lot greater, opening up to the fact we got our main villain, and then you got the Time Force police established, then you got a Red Ranger who had already established himself as, being the only lone Time Force Ranger present, because blue, pink, yellow, and green were not established yet, because Trip, Katie, Lucas, and Jen were rookies at this point. I remember when I first saw this episode, the beginning of Time Force, and when I saw this episode in particular, we're talking part one, when I heard, Alex as the Red Time Force Ranger, his voice sounded a little bit like Jason David Frank as Tommy if Tommy came back as another Red Ranger or something, but that would have been weird, because knowing the fact we have so many actors in Power Rangers named Jason over the years, Jason David Frank, Jason Font, Jason Smith, most of them that were Red Ranger actors named Jason. I like the opening theme for Time Force, well, the opening credits, but not much on the theme song, though. Nothing wrong with it, but it's just, among most of the theme songs for Power Rangers, this one was my least favorite. Not wrong with it, but nothing wrong with it. Knowing they hardly ever used the theme song for the season much, unlike, most majority of Ranger seasons. Like, Lost Galaxy, Lightspeed Rescue, In Space, Turbo, what have you, because Time Force is, they never really use their theme song often when the Rangers do anything epic or interesting. But I do like the orchestral score for the show, but I just not much of a fan of the theme song. Also, in the opening credits for Force from the Future on the Shout Factory DVD, they still kept the Time Shadow Megazord shot in the opening credits for this episode. But in most masters in later episodes, episode edits for the DVD, they still kept that edit. Oh, here's our money shot from the opening credits we just saw in just now. Red Ranger flipping over. And opening up the season with, the Red Ranger versus Rancic is an epic way to open up Time Force, because unlike Quasar Quest, I've noticed that, for the last 20 years I've rewatched Time Force. I had some shades of Lost Galaxy with the season, but the difference is Time Force is only 5 episodes short from Lost Galaxy's length of episodes, but it's the same length of episodes Lightspeed Rescue was. Oh, and Koichi Sakamoto directed part 1. I think he also did part 2. Given that the season was shot 20 years ago, it still feels like ahead of its time with the futuristic technology, but that's what I like about Time Force, because, well, okay, I have to break it to everyone, but 20 years ago when these Power Rangers came out, well, as visually impressive the series is, and with the much rather expensive production value behind the season, I wasn't fond of Time Force at first growing up. Because, based on my biased perspective and how passive aggressive I was with certain seasons, but I still watched all of the Power Rangers nevertheless. But there were some seasons like this that I had been passive aggressive about, because maybe I wasn't sure if I would get into Time Force when it came out 20 years ago. And I wasn't sure if I was interested in the series, because I was all about Lost Galaxy and In Space. They're still my favorite seasons, but Time Force was actually, the more I watched most of the Power Rangers that have came out since 20 years ago up to today, I think seasons like Time Force has surpassed Lost Galaxy in terms of the production value and the acting and writing quality for its time. That's what made Time Force so great. But I was so not into these Power Rangers at first, because around this point in the season, well, I did like some of its visual aesthetics. I wasn't really fond of the overall series, like at first, but I realized that there was going to be something better coming from the season than what I saw with Lost Galaxy, for example. And we just had our first introduction of Nadira, but we'll see more of her after this courtroom scene. I just wasn't fond of Time Force because I thought it wasn't good compared to Lost Galaxy or In Space. But, well, I do like In Space and Lost Galaxy, but I think Time Force, for me, when I think about rewatching this season, this was more of a huge step up over Lightspeed Rescue for most cases because, well, Lightspeed Rescue was all right. It was okay. I mean, it was good in some places too, but what made Lightspeed Rescue weak compared to Time Force's strengths was that, while I liked Lightspeed Rescue for half of some of the Rangers, like Dana and Carter and Ryan and Chad, I started to appreciate Chad's character. Joel and Kelsey's characters, I have such a derivative, opinion for. But for Time Force, I love all of the Rangers, but the only Ranger I don't like from Time Force is Lucas, sadly, because I just didn't like Lucas. But I do like Jen, Wes, Katie, and Trip, and Eric. But Lucas is the only Ranger from Time Force I don't like, and that's sad to say for our Blue Ranger. And also, when they did the proposal scene with Alex and Jen, they actually blend in the footage of Time Ranger's futuristic setting very well, and with some newer, shots that was, from the Sentai footage. And for the very first time, we actually have a courtroom thing for Power Rangers. We hardly ever see that in the series. And I have to amend Saban back then for doing something like this, because Time Force was perhaps way more mature than I thought I realized for the original Saban era. And the holographic judges, that is so, they actually took some of this kind of technology from all kinds of science fiction, with the holographic people and, with something that was, lifted out of Star Wars or something like that. So, yeah. And seeing that Rancic getting imprisoned for life, but then, of course, what happens, because a lot of us have seen this, even when it first premiered 20 years ago, part 1 of Force from the Future, but part 2 was the next Saturday after, because I'm doing both episodes for the fan commentary to commemorate 20 years since the season began. But I have to realize that the series did excel a lot stronger than I realized. Oh, an exterior shot of the futuristic city from the Sentai footage of the year 3000. What I do like about the two-parter of Force from the Future is that it improves and extends on what Time Ranger established, but except Rancic was only made exclusive for Power Rangers, so he's another villain made exclusive for our show, because Gluto was the main villain in Time Ranger. So therefore, Gluto is just only as a sidekick to Rancic's crew, but Gluto doesn't hardly do anything beyond this two-parter. So that's sad to say, because most of the time, it's mostly Rancic, Nadira, and Frax doing stuff. Gluto is just in the background, for the most part. Yeah, I wouldn't be smiling if I were you, knowing you're going to jail. He would repeat the line, "The future is full of surprises," a few times in part 1, because, well, knowing the fact that, if you recall back when the episode opened, when following the opening narration and then showing off the Time Force police trying to capture Rancic, he said, "If I can't rule the present, I'll rule the past." Foreshadowing. Does the Time Force even have an ambulance? Oh shit, Lady Deathstrike nails! Yeah, again, Nadira was first with the pink hair for a pink-haired female villain. Capri from Ninja Storm will be second. This is very different from typical Power Rangers season openers, because we got so much action, so much of this drama, all packed in one two-parter for an opening for a season. That is incredible for 2001, and considering this year is the 20th anniversary. And seeing how Time Force still holds up after all these years. 20 years later, it still holds up on many levels with certain things. I have to also point out some differences that they did with Nadira's character from Time Ranger versus what they've done with her character here. I mean, in Time Ranger, Nadira's counterpart was a gold digger, a gold digger for Gluto's counterpart, but it makes sense for Saban and crew to make Nadira the daughter of Rancic, because at least unlike Scorpius and Trakina, I actually prefer Rancic and Nadira with the father and daughter duo stuff this season as opposed to an LG, but TF with Rancic and Nadira. But knowing the fact Nadira did do some things as a villain during her time, but beyond this point from the pilot in episode 7, I believe, after 7 episodes, Nadira would be like more of a laid-back sidekick or does hardly anything beyond those first 7 episodes of the season. She would occasionally fight the Rangers later beyond episode 7. Most of the time, she's just lazy and just doesn't want to do anything. Oh yeah, Captain Logan. I keep forgetting he exists in the season. And what a dick he was to the rookies. Oh yeah, Bluetooth headsets in 2001, but again, this is so ahead of the time where we are now. This is why I don't like Lucas. Now that stock footage was from Time Ranger with that ship going to that prison. And of course, they have to green screen our characters in the shot. Oh, that monster we'll see later on in episode 6. That monster with the flaming red jacket. Oh, and they also used the Starship Trooper uniforms that we saw earlier in Lost Galaxy, but modified to be more futuristic aesthetic for the season. But again, Saban was known for reusing certain props and stuff from past Power Ranger seasons because, again, even in Super Sentai, they tend, Power Rangers and Sentai both reuse certain prop and setting, elements from one season to another and another to sustain some continuity. Though that Power Rangers is the one that does the most continuity, Sentai doesn't hardly do that, but they use certain prop aesthetics from a certain series or 2 or more and update them for the setting there. I mean, Nadira does some stuff here, but again, when she blasted those guys, that could have killed them using one of the Chrono Blasters. I wish that Nadira did more in the series than she actually does beyond, but again, in the first 7 episodes, she did stuff, but beyond episode 7 until the end of the series, she doesn't do anything. I'm just like, what happened to that progression? At least I rather prefer Nadira from the early half of the season over Vipra throughout the whole season of Lightspeed Rescue, because Vipra, you see, the problem with Vipra, she didn't, she was supposed to be something when we had our humanoid-looking female villain in the Lightspeed Rescue cast of villains. But knowing to the fact when we had Vipra, of course, she couldn't act for crap. And also we have our first alien Green Ranger, although we've had a couple of alien Power Rangers in the past. But what I like about Trip is that despite him being of the Zybrian tribe, he can see through the future as well as the past, and especially what's happening or see what's actually happening behind the scenes, seeing visions of what's going on with like anything. He would utilize this ability later on in Circuit Unsure, but it seemed like he hardly ever used this ability beyond this episode. It seemed like once we get later on into Time Force, he would use that, but only for Circuit Unsure. But after that, his Zybrian gemstone just only exists as a piece of costume makeup for his character. And futuristic cars, see, what I like about the season is that, well, if this series was made today, they would have this up-to-date I like to see how Katie was being more sincere and nice while Jen was being brash and stuff, you know, throwing that guy out of that futuristic car, because the Rangers need these would-be Rangers would have a vehicle in order to transport, because they don't have vector cycles or that truck anymore, because Rancic destroyed those vehicles. They will reuse this shot when he said the future is full of surprises and Clash for Control, in case you didn't know about that continuity of some of the reused footage from an episode or so later or earlier. This is the moment that everyone pretty much finds traumatic watching, knowing that this battle with the Red Ranger and Rancic, this is one of the most gruesome battle scenes for a season opener of Power Rangers. And I remember 20 years ago, this was one of the most saddest, gruesome moments. I mean, sure, of all the times we've seen Magna Defender die, Kendricks die, Zordon, Alex was another character in Power Rangers to die, but as Time Force progressed, that the longer that Jen and the rest of the team stay in the year 2001 and alter the course of the time that's in this time that they're at this point, because they're from the future, and the longer they stay in the past and alter the course of this point, it causes a lot of friction with the time stream and stuff, and pretty much alters Alex's supposed demise from this point. Ugh, yeah, seeing the strike from the back was just, oh my god. Maybe they should have just kept Alex dead. I mean, but of course, again, when they, alter the course of history, Alex mysteriously came back from the dead. But he was the one who sent all the stuff for the Rangers, the Time Shadow, the Time Flyers, and some other stuff that they needed. Knowing the fact Jason Font played both Alex and Wes, so knowing the fact that Alex was Jen's fiance from this point, but when she goes into the past and comes across a descendant of Alex in the year 2001, our time back then 20 years ago, that being Wes, knowing the fact that Jason Font was partly brown-haired, blonde, while Alex was dark-haired, so it makes a lot of sense. But now, my theory, what I tried to say years ago, I don't even think I think back in my fan commentary for Quantum Secrets, that if Alex did come back, he could have came back as the Quantum Ranger. Erica would still be with the Silver Guardians, but no, they have to follow what was in the Time Ranger material from Sentai, with the fact that the first Red Time Force Ranger, well, he's dead, but then when they get Wes, when we get to the next episode, but then many episodes when we get introduced to the Silver Guardians, and then yeah, that's very sad and depressing to see Alex supposedly dead. But again, when they alter the course of the time stream, see, everything that I saw from Quasar Quest when Leo lost his brother, this is just like when Jen has to feel resentment and sorrow for losing her fiance that she almost got married to. But Rancic killed Alex. But again, he was supposed to be considered dead, but again, look what happens. And then again, here we go. As soon as we close out part one, then they take the time ship to travel back to the year 2001 to stop Rancic from altering the course of history, because that's the premise of the season, is to stop a time traveling crime boss from trying to alter the course of the time that's happening here, in the year 3000, and then alter all of that for the year 2001, and also have Time Force happen in our time and have a team of Power Rangers from the future happen here. This is exactly a translation from Time Rangers opening, also with the Transwarp Megazord about to launch the ship and going through that time bridge for them to travel to the past and stop Rancic. And this is where the series begins. Oh yeah, and the Transwarp Megazord is pretty useless. It only exists just to punch the butts of the vehicles that the Rangers will use, like Zords and the Time Ship, and have it sent into our time back then, which was considered the present, but in the time they considered it was in the past. But it's confusing. So they have to travel so many years AD, or it should have been BC, but whatever, before such. But that's how part 1 ends. So we go into part 2. So we open up to part 2, and you can see someone's coffee mug say, "Welcome to the year 2001," or "Happy New Year 2001." And basically, again, there was a time before Time Force didn't exist in this time period, because due to everything they're doing with all this time travel this season, Time Force was supposed to be about time travel, but I think maybe there had to be some budget constraints that caused them not to do any of that time travel stuff this season at all much. This alleyway, they would use this so much during the original run of Power Rangers by Saban. They've used this alleyway so much since, because this alleyway we've seen so many times during the post-Zordon era, because they've been using this alleyway a lot for this era. And again, in the past, there was no chrono blasters. It was just one of those pistol guns. And even for a kid show like Power Rangers, we had a character use a pistol gun in an episode of Lightspeed Rescue, so it was no different here for this season. So, and again, even in this season, we still have the empty box decoration setting for set locations and stuff. I like the fact they did extend Time Rangers' first episode to 2 episodes for the adaptation, because they wanted to do something completely original with the season, and while being faithful to Time Ranger at most points and some points, but they have to alter things to be more appropriate for our show, because Time Ranger was a lot darker than Time Force, but I say Time Force was kind of equally as dark. And they would also use some of the footage of the time ship's explosion from the footage. It makes sense because, again, you're adapting everything that was straight from the footage, but you have to do something completely different from what was done from the Sentai footage. Oh yeah, Koji Sakamoto did do part 2. I was right. I still have my Chronomorpher toy, and 20 years later, it still works and the batteries still work. But I'm missing the wristband. Of course, they can't, morph into the Rangers because they're missing a red member. So they have to find someone that's tied to Alex's DNA or close to his DNA in order for the morphers to be fully activated, in order for them to be a team to stop Rancic. But they have a long way to go to capture him, so they have to go through all of his mutants. Oh yeah, and this music that Glenn Scott Lacey, the composer that did some scores for Power Rangers during Turbo through Time Force, he did the score for most of this music for the season. You can find some of that background music on YouTube of his for the season. And I remember 10 years ago, I downloaded that music off Power Ranger Planet years ago when the music was still available on that site, available to download. Yeah, because Glenn Scott Lacey did do some of the music scores for Power Rangers and some of his, for Turbo through Time Force, but some of this music like that. But then again, also with those glasses, those glasses, for the time have some really futuristic, technology to those. I mean, compared to the VR headsets and stuff we got now, and those smart, potential smart glasses we probably have now, I guess. Nadira would rob a jewelry store in Last Race, which is many episodes from now. So again, while 2017 Rita did that in the 2017 movie, but again, Nadira did that first. She did that first. Sorry, 2017 movie Rita. The Cyclobots are one of my favorite foot soldiers in Power Rangers. They're kind of a cheery bunch of foot soldiers doing that typical robotic, up and arm up and down movement, and then jogging and stuff, and then shoot their paper, cardboard looking blaster looking things. I mean, Gluto, he's here, but it's just the problem is they don't utilize him for anything. Building up to the fact with Jen confronting Nadira, there could have been potential they could have had a rivalry this season, but no. Jen is more Rancic fixated than dealing with all of her. Well, again, the team is all fixated on trying to capture Rancic. So when anyone associated with Rancic, they have to, confront them during the season, including the mutants. I told you, the plot hole is, why would you want to morph and say Time Force if you don't have a Red Ranger? So you got to do this unmorph. And considering this was post-Zordon, most of the Rangers during this era, again, the actors for the Time Force cast, much like other casts from this era Power Rangers, they couldn't do much fighting, so they have to get knocked around or do a little small kicks and flips and some punches to the foot soldiers. So they couldn't really do much fighting. But at least with Jen, you can see some of that kicking and punching, but she still keeps getting her ass whooped. Even with Nadira whooping her ass here. I think they also integrated some of the rivalry between Pink Ranger female villain also from Lightspeed Rescue Sentai counterpart, because Vipra in Go-Go 5 had some beef with the Pink Ranger in the Sentai footage of Lightspeed Rescue Go-Go 5, but not much in Time Ranger. But what's also inconsistent, once the Cyclobot kicks Jen from that plaza point, then we go to here where they were at this place where Nasada would be back in space, but it feels a little inconsistent when switching from one location during that fight to another place. It feels a little inconsistent, but whatever. Shock of all shocks. Looks like she has seen a ghost. Basically someone that does look like her fiance that's supposedly dead. And yeah, it's Wes, because basically Wes is more optimistic while Alex was, strong-headed and direct and a bit rude and brash. That bland expression on Lucas' face saying this is unbelievable. The other Rangers are more optimistic about this, but Lucas is like, this is unbelievable. That is so flat of Lucas to say that. Oh yeah, here's a fun fact I've noticed. Jason Font, who played Wes, he originally auditioned for a few Red Rangers before this point in Power Rangers. I had no idea he was once a runner-up for the role of Leo in Lost Galaxy, but then also Rhett Fisher, who we know for our beloved Titanium Ranger Ryan, he also was a runner-up for Leo's part. So eventually, Fisher and Font both would be recast for their respective seasons for the respective Rangers. I had no idea that Jason Font was originally going to play Leo, but luckily I think Time Force was a better fitting for him to play for a Red Ranger. Now that mansion there, where is this located in California? If I was rich, I would actually have a mansion like this. You know, the butler for the Collins residence, he looks so much like Alfred from Batman, particularly Alfred Pennyworth from Batman the Animated Series, but in live action. It's so bizarre and odd and weird at the same time thinking about it, too. It's just the actor who plays the butler here, he's only around for only 3 episodes and he's gone. And of course, the main meat of the season with Wes's storyline is with his father, the Mr. Collins. We don't know what his real name is. Is it, his first name other than Mr. Collins, but being more formal. His actor, well, rest in peace to him, because he did pass away 15 years ago, somewhere around this period. He was a great actor. You know, he was a great casting choice to play Wes's dad this season. He was also the voice of Daredevil and Spider-Man the Animated Series, too. And some other stuff he was in, too, before Power Rangers. I forgot his name. His name escapes me every time. I just saw his name in the opening credits. I'm being a dumbass not knowing his name. I know his face, but he's been dead for years, but rest in peace. One of the other strengths about Time Force was Wes and Jen's relationship throughout the whole season. I mean, when she first met Wes, she was being rude to him because Wes wasn't taking the whole being a ranger stuff very seriously. But, you know, the only purpose she gave him the morpher was to unlock. And now Wes is being a dumbass saying, what's a morpher? You know, typically, again, we've had this morpher concept ever since the beginning of Power Rangers with Mighty Morphin Season 1. And again, the morpher is a transformation device for anyone wearing a morpher or possessing a morpher, that may be a phone, wristband, otherwise, to become that multicolored spandex-clad superhero with such powers and stuff. You got her hopes up thinking you believe her, but then you piss her off and disappointed her. I guess maybe it's because, again, maybe Jen is going through these 5 stages of grief at this point, because around this point in the season, she's still going through those stages of grief, losing her fiance, because going for the man who looks like her opposed fiance from her timeline, and then in this point in time, yeah, that's kind of bizarre, isn't it? Now, this local street area they use for this big battle for part 2, when they finally get the team together and finally get into the suits. This is the same location they used for Lightspeed Rescue's first episode, but I think they actually upped the ante from Operation Lightspeed by making it more fleshed out with the characters before they get into the suits. Well, I mean, nothing wrong with Operation Lightspeed, but Operation Lightspeed, it went a bit too fast for a season opener. Nothing wrong with that, though. Introducing all the characters at once, introducing the demons and Captain Mitchell and the Lightspeed Rangers, and then introducing the morphers and the suits and stuff and the batlings. But this was more fleshed out than Operation Lightspeed, in my opinion. I mean, because I think that the more I rewatched Time Force, I realized that there was more of an improving progression from what was done in Lightspeed Rescue. Because Lightspeed Rescue, well, it was okay, but it was just, I think Time Force trumped Lightspeed Rescue up a notch with more mature storytelling than Lightspeed Rescue did. I mean, Lightspeed Rescue was written maturely as well, but it still had some of that kid show fodder to it, though, and some other stuff to it. Wes is another Red Ranger who couldn't take the whole Red Ranger thing a little seriously, like Leo and some other Red Rangers later on after him. This is so bizarre that Rancic is going to see the lookalike of the Red Ranger he believed he killed, but he did. And I liked it how in the subtext of that line, he's like, I will destroy you once and I will destroy you again. But it makes a lot of sense because this is again, it's a doppelganger of what Alex was in the, in Jen's time, but takes place in our time because Wes is from our time stream, not from where Jen and them come from. The Time Force morph sequence is okay, but it's just too quick for me. Oh yeah, the Time Force suits, well, for 20 years, I've always kind of did like these Ranger suits. I like the helmets for the most part. Not much white on the suits, but a lot of black and silver for the boots and gloves and stuff. And this was the first Ranger team. One of the things I had an issue with these Ranger suits for years was that, Matrix moves incoming, because again, the Matrix was such a huge deal back in the late 90s, early 2000s. The Matrix did had a huge influence on some of our stuff back in the early 2000s because, again, Matrix came out in 1999. So, but anyway, about the Time Force suits. I like the futuristic aesthetic for the suits because, considering that Time Force was the first Power Ranger team for the overall Ranger garb, that for the first time we would have multicolored, have colored, boots and gloves, because, I wasn't fond of that choice of the costume stuff at first, having the boots and gloves being the same color. Because if I look back on the Aquitar Rangers, when I look back on the Alien Ranger suits, they had multicolored boots and gloves too. So Time Force was the first team since the Alien Rangers to keep that tradition. And most Ranger teams following Time Force would follow this pattern with the boots and gloves being colored. And some Ranger teams after them would have the white gloves but colored boots for some. And yeah, the suits are awesome. I mean, despite that, I don't hardly hear a lot of people talk about the Time Force suits that much when people talk about best and worst Ranger suits from Sentai and Power Rangers. Yeah, I mean, the battle just begun because you can't deal with Rancic right away because we're a long season ahead from capturing him. So you have to deal with all of his forces, his mutants first and stuff, and the X-Vault robots from Frax later. Again, Gluto gets to do at least one thing here, but after this point, he doesn't hardly do anything. Oh, and this is a move that I think Jen captured from Tommy with the Zeo5 power kick, but for a Pink Ranger. The only Rangers that would do the time strike would only be red, pink, and green, but blue and yellow doesn't do that ability. There is our money shot from the opening credits again, with all 5 Rangers beyond the explosion. So they're a long way off, and knowing the fact that Gluto, Frax, and Nadira were main villains in Time Ranger, Rancic did not exist in Time Ranger. He was only made for Power Rangers. But as soon as they had their first battle, then all of a sudden, Jen takes Wes's morpher away. I get it, just to only unlock the morpher so they can finally have the ability to morph. But again, Wes wasn't taking this seriously. Again, he got too excited being a Power Ranger, and that's why Jen took the morpher from him. Because again, Wes doesn't know how to fight, so wait until the next episode, and then, yeah, there you go. And I was like, wow, how bitchy of Jen to do that. But again, there was a purpose, because again, only to unlock the morpher, just so they can continue the mission. But Wes, if you're not going to take it seriously, then you might just well quit when you have the chance. I like his response. He was like, whatever, I'm out. I did my purpose. I'm done. I'm going home. So yeah, Force from the Future was a very strong start for Time Force. And 20 years later, it's still a good season opener for Power Rangers. Establishing the characters, fleshing them out for 2 episodes before we even fully flesh them out further. And I see that Trip and Katie are more concerned why they took them away while Jen and Lucas are more strong-headed about it. But I wish she should have never took the morpher from him, though. So that was that.